Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to give an update about risk across the crypto market across timeframes. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So if you've been following the markets for the last couple days, you probably noticed that Bitcoin had a pretty banner day yesterday, and a lot of altcoins have also had nice moves to the upside along with it, with some moving a bit more today now that Bitcoin's kind of consolidating a little bit after its big 11% plus pump to the upside. So what I want to do today is just take a look at the risk landscape across the crypto space to get an idea of where we might be, where we are. Now, again, it's important to say that this pump that Bitcoin is, there's no guarantee it has to continue, but if it does, I think it's useful to know which assets are looking especially tasty from a risk reward perspective right now. So I'm going to start off with Bitcoin and look at its risk level across different time frames. So what I'm showing you here is the Bitcoin risk based on our upside downside potential indicator. And with this indicator, if you're familiar, it can observe risk across different time frames. So there's a long-term UDPI that cares about moves that play over months to years, so more of a long time frame that it's looking at. Medium term that cares about risk that plays out over weeks to months, so a bit shorter in its time preference. And then short term, which cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, so kind of a shorter time span that it's looking at there. And what we can see is that with Bitcoin, we're in the negative territory across the board. You'll notice that the short-term UDPI has moved up closer to zero as Bitcoin has been realizing some of its shorter-term upside potential with that recent move. But with the long term, you can see it hasn't moved the needle all that much. It has moved it a little bit. We had been down below -3 for a while there. But with that kind of show of strength, Bitcoin's now up at -2.68. So overall, we're still in kind of the lower risk zone with Bitcoin for sure. The model thinks that there's more realistic upside than downside potential for Bitcoin. So this would not be an implausible place for Bitcoin to start a nice move to the upside. Doesn't say that has to happen, right? There is realistic room to the downside that could happen instead. But certainly, this is not an unrealistic place for Bitcoin to set the stage for a move to the upside, something to keep an eye on. Having risk reset to this level, this is oftentimes what we've seen in the past before Bitcoin is able to put in these big rallies to the upside, often this kind of resetting of risk that sets the stage for nice rallies into the future. Have to wait and see if that happens, but just something to keep an eye on. And then medium term, it thinks that there's more realistic upside than downside potential in the medium term. Maybe not quite as bullish as Bitcoin has realized some of that kind of upside potentially in the shorter term, like we're seeing over here. But still, plenty of room in the coming weeks for it to move up. It's not by any means seeming to have exhausted its upside potential in the medium term or in the short term, and definitely not in the longer term. So let's flip over to Ethereum, the other kind of big dog in the crypto space, see what it's been doing. Here we see kind of an interesting spread. So Ethereum is quite low risk like Bitcoin in the long term. So the model thinks there's more realistic upside than downside in the long term by a good margin, sitting at -2.31. Obviously still downside is possible, but it's really biased towards the upside here. And we can kind of see this bottom that has been forming in Ethereum's risk level and its UDPI level over the last couple of weeks, and now starting to tick back up. Medium term also bullish, a little bit higher in the level, -1.61, but again, more realistic upside than downside potential in the more medium term. And the short term, with Ethereum having pumped alongside of Bitcoin yesterday pretty nicely, reclaiming the $3,000 level, it had realized some of the upside potential in the short term, but still plenty of realistic room left. So, it would not be impossible at all for Ethereum to keep on running and realize some of this in the shorter term. But there's also realistic downside potential. So the model's a little bit more kind of neutral for the shorter term. It thinks that it's very plausible there'd be more upside, but there's also realistic downside as well. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. So now I wanted to zoom out and look at different altcoins and just see what risk looks like across the broader market. And one thing I think is remarkable when you just look at the UDPI level across the crypto space of all the different altcoins that we're tracking here, there's really only 3 that are in the positive zone, and Luna only just barely so at 0.1. 2021. But really, for the long-term UDPIs across the crypto space, this is overall prevailing bullish bias. There's more realistic upside than downside potential from the model's standpoint across all of these different crypto assets, except for these 3 outliers, and really more or less just 2 actual outliers. And even Atom and Phantom aren't particularly extended in risk. They're just a little bit elevated. So they certainly would have room to move to the upside should the broader market pump from this kind of level. And I think this is interesting to note because this is the kind of environment that you more or less want to see or need to see a big rally out of the market, right? Look back to the summer 21. This was the kind of profile that the UDPI was in at that time, that for most assets, they were deep into the green zone across the space with some variability, some lower down than others. But again, this prevalence of negative values on the UDPI, this low risk kind of environment that then set the stage for a nice move up where assets were able to realize a good amount of upside potential. Now again, doesn't guarantee that has to happen from here, but this is the kind of setup you'd look for that to happen, right? Back when we were in November, for example, the landscape was totally different if you were following the channel. You know, only back then it was only a handful of assets that were in the negatives, or at least in the negatives to any convincing level. Most of them were at most just in the kind of -1 point something range. We weren't seeing these, you know, -3s, -4s, etc. Now we are. So to think about this setting the stage for a big move to the upside, this seems more likely to be setting the stage for that than an environment like we were in November. And of course, in November, we ended up falling off before maybe now being able to start moving back up. But again, still a little bit too early to know if this will be sustained. But again, this is the kind of landscape you'd probably be looking for something like that to happen across the crypto market. Same with the medium-term UDPIs. We look at these, it's really only here Atom and Phantom that are in the positive zone. Everything else in the medium term is more in the bullish bias. So the model thinks across the board, except for these 2 outliers, there's more upside than downside potential that's realistic in the medium term. Not to say that we can't realize that downside potential, but it's the risk-reward ratio is favorable across the board in the medium-term perspective from the UDPI's point of view. And a similar story comes out with the short term. In fact, the short term, the only asset that's technically in the positive is Phantom. It's only just barely so. And I think that, for me, in the short term is quite bullish because it suggests that we're really primed to start realizing some short-term upside potential here. You just look at these values. We're really primed to be able to put in at least some kind of relief in the short term. Now again, with the crypto markets, nothing's guaranteed, so don't take that as being definitive that has to happen. But certainly, we are set up for that to happen quite well. That if broader market conditions get bullish and we start seeing some, you know, new demand flowing in, some inflows back into the market after people had pulled out so much, going to that kind of more risk-off macro setting that we've been in for the last couple months, then that could see some nice relief. Doesn't mean that we have to go clearing into all-time highs for these assets, but certainly they could put in some nice moves to the upside should they end up doing that. And again, just as I've been saying, when you see risk at such a low level across the crypto space, that is the kind of setup that oftentimes can precede those nice moves to the upside. Now again, doesn't mean it has to happen immediately, doesn't mean technically it has to happen at all, but oftentimes it does happen. So just something to keep in mind. Alright, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.